going on, guys? It's Ben with liftedimports.com and the host of the Dirt Subies podcast. And it's time once again to talk about some of my favorite lift kits for Subarus. Now, I know there's a lot of options out there. There's a ton of stuff you could look at. There's a ton of things you could consider. But what I'm going to talk about today is what I would recommend to friends and family, or what I would purchase and put on my own vehicles. Just because I don't recommend something in this video doesn't mean it's not good. I'm just going to share things that I either have used or things that I would recommend personally to people that I know based on my experience. So one of the first things I want to get out of the way real quick is spacer lifts are 100% okay to use when it comes to lifting a Subaru. You don't have to feel like you got to spend $3,000 on a coilover setup on Subarus. I've talked about this before, but the performance difference is marginal for 90% of us that are out here trying to just go off the pavement in our Subarus and kind of get out and go camping, go see some nature, do some light off-roading. There's almost no benefit. Instead, you end up with a bunch of extra, maintenance that you got to keep up on and just other things that you have to kind of dial in to make it work right. And if you're not already kind of like a suspension junkie, in my opinion, in most cases, it just doesn't pencil out. Now, I'm not saying that you shouldn't go buy a suspension lift like coilovers or whatever. You can absolutely do that. You just need to know that it's not a simple plug and play option. And the gains that you'll receive in terms of performance benefit is going to be pretty negligible in most cases. Now, if you're the type of person that's doing autocross or a lot of high-speed driving on rough roads, and I'm talking like a lot, if you're doing long distances and your thing is, I like jumping my Subaru and I like doing 50 miles an hour on washboard roads, well, in that case, you might want to consider a decent coilover. I'm going to talk about mainly spacer lifts because that's what I use. That's what a lot of folks use, and it's the most straightforward, set it and forget it, reliable option that's really out there for our cars. So the first one, you guys know that I love ADF lift kits. That's what I've been running for a long time. I first started buying parts from them about 10 years ago, and I've continued to do that. Their stuff is well made. They offer pretty much everything for all cars. I know a lot of you guys might know them for some of their bigger lift kits that they do. They still produce some like the Mammoth lift kit for certain models, but they've kind of scaled back on doing that just a little bit. And in my opinion, doing anything above, the normal, 1.5 to 2 inches on Subarus doesn't make a whole lot of sense, just in my opinion. But ADF is definitely a brand that if you're not already looking at them seriously, you should. Their stuff is powder coated well. It's designed well. Pat takes a lot of time to do the R&D to really make the lift kits work correctly and to be as straightforward as possible and to kind of keep everything about as close to factory suspension geometry as possible when it comes to our cars. His are by far the easiest that I've ever put in a car. You just put them in. Now you've got your lift. You take it to the alignment shop, and most times it's going to be no problem. One of the biggest things I like about ADF lift kits is the customer support. So even before, I met Patrick and, connected with him, I've called their shop numerous times for a wide range of different questions, and 9 times out of 10, it was him that would answer the phone. I'll just say, hey, I'm trying to install this and I'm running into this issue. Have you seen this before? What do you think? And he would take time to help me figure it out. Or, if I had somebody reach out to me and say, hey, I'm looking for somebody to install a lift kit and I live in this area, I would call Pat and be like, hey, I've got somebody that's looking for, an installer in Illinois or wherever it was. Do you have a dealer there that you trust? And he was always super helpful. So in my opinion, that's a huge part of the buying process for me. If I know that the company that I'm buying stuff from actually cares about post-purchase support, that's really important. So for almost everything that I buy for my car, ADF is usually the first stop. Now, the next company that I would probably recommend right now in 2025 would be Primitive Racing. And their stuff I would recommend for the person that is maybe looking for a more refined lift kit, something that includes lift springs, something that's not over the top, something that you could go lift your car, bring it home, the wife could drive it around and not really know that, the car had been modified, because it's still going to handle well. It's not going to sag when it's loaded up with a bunch of gear. Body roll is going to be minimized, and it's not going to be, a max lift. Their stuff, in my opinion, is, I guess I would call it like a mature lift. It's for that person. Let's say you're, 45 and you're kind of done with, trying to push everything to the limits, and you just want a lift kit that's still going to make the car feel like you drove it off the lot, with a little bit more clearance and the ability to still fit the bigger tire. And typically when I'm modifying a car, what I'm looking for is I'm looking for the least amount of lift that will still allow me to fit the tire size that I'm going for. The least lift with the biggest tire is always my goal. And what that allows me to do is just have a car that's a little bit easier to manage. It's not going to have as much body roll. It's not going to have, as big of, or just, I was just talking to Mitch Meadows actually about this recently, but the drag coefficient of the vehicle is not going to be as big, just a little bit more refined. And their lift kits almost always include springs. So King Springs is what they sell, some of the best lift springs. If I was going to buy lift springs or recommend them to, friends or family, King is 100% what I would use and what I would recommend. I own a set of King Springs. Their stuff is just tried and true. So you can get those through Primitive Racing, and they also will typically include small spacers. So they'll do a small spacer with a real mild lift in the spring, so you can still get everything, up there where you need it. And it's typically, their lift kits kind of stop at a point to where you can do all that and still get everything back into the factory alignment specs. And to me, that's a big deal, because I don't want to have to go chasing around, little parts in order to have to dial in the alignment. Now, I know some of you are going to be like, hey, I don't really care. I just want like the craziest lift, and I just don't care. I'll figure it out. I'll put different trailing arms on the car. I'll do different, control arms. I'll do different this. I'll do different that. And that's totally fine. But I find that a overwhelming majority of people, they are not gearheads like the rest of us. Most of us just want to put something in the car that's going to accomplish the goal that we're trying to get to, and just run it. That's honestly, with a lot of stuff, that's how I am, especially if you guys are using this vehicle as your daily driver. If this is going to be your daily driver, you can't really afford to, be spending 4 hours trying to dial in new parts. So that's something that I really appreciate about the Primitive stuff. It's very, very well thought out and very well designed in order to just be something that you almost forget is even there, because it works so good. Now, I especially recommend their kits to anybody if you are overloading the car with a bunch of gear. You got a spare tire carrier or something like that. At the very minimum, I would be talking to them about getting a set of lift springs or overload springs for your car in order to help offset that extra weight that you're carrying around. Now, one of the other options that you guys could look at would be Rally Tech. Now, I don't personally run any Rally Tech parts, and I would never tell somebody they shouldn't look at a Rally Tech lift kit. Their stuff's great. I would say it's probably one of the only other US-based manufacturers that I would say is even close to being able to be on the same level as like an ADF lift kit. When it comes to steel spacer lifts, there is a certain point where, you're kind of looking at the same thing, sort of. And again, I just don't run their stuff. I just never have. So they would be another kit that you might want to look into, just check prices and see based on availability, see what's out there. Their stuff's powder coated well. They also offer some spring lift options, some overload springs, some lift springs, things like that they've developed. Now, I will say that I still prefer the King springs from Primitive over the Rallytech springs, uh, simply because of it's a slightly newer product, but they're doing a lot of cool stuff. They're making all sorts of parts for our cars that just typically wouldn't have been available otherwise. A lot of control arm solutions that are adjustable, things like that. Quick release brackets for sway bars, things that would typically have only been available in the Jeep and, 4Runner Tacoma world. They've kind of adapted some of those things and made them work for our cars. Now, the one thing that I will say is if you get excited about that type of stuff, that's cool. Just know that a lot of those things, they do present, additional noise, NVH, noise, vibration, harshness, as it's called. Just know that when you start modding things with aftermarket parts, you're going to start hearing new noises. You're going to start experiencing new things that you didn't really necessarily hear when you were running, stock suspension setups. It's just not quite going to be exactly the same. And that's true for aftermarket parts in any market, whether it's a Jeep or Toyota, whatever. That's really well understood across the board in other off-road markets. I just find that when it comes to Subarus, people will start adding, coilovers, aftermarket this, aftermarket that, and then be shocked when it doesn't really sound the same way or handle the same way as what it did right off the showroom floor. That's just the nature of the game. Just understand that that's part of doing this. So those are the 3 lift kits that I would probably personally be looking at, in terms of if somebody came to me, a family member came to me and said, hey, I'm lifting my Subaru, what should I get? Those would be the 3 options that I would show them first. Now, I'm not saying that any of the other stuff that's out there you shouldn't buy. I just personally have my own preferences, and these are the ones that I would consider. You're also going to have things like, Rika lift kits. You're going to have Ready Lift. You're going to have Rough Country, FDF Race Shop. A lot of other stuff. There's that other, is it like HGR or something? They're like a Honda company. They made lift kits for Hondas. They also make some Subaru lift kits. You can look at all those. It's just not what I'm into. I'm not saying that they're good. I'm not saying that they're bad. It's just not stuff I would run. And then I also want to mention suspension lifts. I already touched on this briefly, but if you are going to be looking at a suspension lift, it's totally up to you. I don't mind if you do that. I personally don't have any need for it. Don't have any desire to try it out. It's totally up to you. However, there is one specific company that I know a lot of people are looking at, the Ironman 4x4 suspension lifts. And that whole thing has played out exactly the way that I knew it would. I remember maybe 3 years ago, whenever it was that they first started to kind of gain popularity and launch that product, I remember saying, hey, this is really cool. I'm happy this is an option for us and for our cars. However, just be aware that if you guys are going to buy these, you are kind of the guinea pigs. We don't really know what the long-term quality of these struts and springs are. We don't really know where these are being made. They don't have any really historical data yet to determine whether or not these are going to be durable and have any longevity to them. And I know there's a lot of people who've had great experiences with them, but there's also been a massive number of people that have had sagging issues. A lot of that sagging has come from the rear bushing on the shocks in the rear on all the new multi-link stuff. There's also people who've experienced sagging from the springs themselves. And, you might think, oh, well, that's horrible, that's awful. And it does, it sucks. But what I will say is that's just what happens with new products. And when you're working with a company who they're basically having to outsource manufacturing. There's not really any manufacturing here in the United States to produce that product at a price that would be even remotely attainable for any of us, or at least to make it a viable product to put out to the market. And so when you have to outsource your manufacturing, which Most companies should. It doesn't make a lot of sense to try to build an entire, suspension manufacturing facility, for a few different lines of cars. That just makes no sense. It would never happen. It's not something that is going to be easy to do, and it's not going to be attainable for really any consumer. But what that means is that there's going to be a period of feedback where the manufacturer or, the seller, they're going to have to receive a lot of those units back and autopsy them, figure out, what's wrong with them. Is this a manufacturer's defect? Did our supplier, do something that essentially made it to where, we just didn't get what we paid for? Or do we need to rethink this whole thing and have them build us something that makes more sense, And so you can buy one of those kits if you want. I would say if your suspension's already on the way out and you're willing to kind of take the gamble on, whether or not you're going to get a good set, it's totally up to you. If you still have good OEM suspension, I'm a huge fan of the Subaru OEM suspension components. The struts are great. The springs are good. I just pulled a set of 15-year-old struts out of a Subaru like a couple weeks ago. Pulled them out. They were still perfectly fine. Had tons of pressure. No issues at all. No leaking. The finish was still good. No sagging in the front of the rear of that car. And literally 15 years old, they were the original struts and springs. So I think if you can retain as much of the OEM suspension, that's great. And, this video is kind of already getting way out of hand. I'm going off on a tangent here. But I know a lot of you have these questions. And it's just the way my brain works. So that's why we're going here. Now, the other thing, if you are the person who wants to do a long travel coilover suspension, just know that you really aren't actually gaining a ton of extra travel because of the way that our Subarus are designed from the factory. You can have as much travel as you want in the shock, but the way that the control arms are set up, the way that the subframe is set up, the CV axles, all these different limiting factors, those are actually your limiting factors. It's not necessarily the shock or the strut that you have. But if you want to go that route because you need the extra, fluid capacity or whatever to do high-speed stuff on rough roads, totally fine and totally okay with that. They do require specific setup. You can't just pull them out of the box and put them in. You got to know how to set up the ride height, the preload, all these different things, and they need maintenance. Coilovers need to be rebuilt on a regular basis. But if you're gonna go that route, the brand that I would look at would be Raceworks. That's what I would put on my car if I came to this, conclusion that this is what I need. Raceworks is probably what I would do. You could also look at Flat Out suspension, make some coilovers for our car. I've heard mixed reviews about Flat Out. I've heard really good stories. I've heard really bad stories about customer service, but I do know that they changed hands at some point. So anytime, there's any sort of a merger or an acquisition, there's always going to be some turmoil during the process of, that changing of hands that's, going to affect, in some cases, the level of customer service that you're able to, offer to your customers. But that said, those are the lift kits that I would be looking at for myself or for family members. You can't go wrong with any of the three brands that I mentioned to you, whether it's ADF, Primitive Racing, and Rally Tech. One of the main reasons is the customer support. You can reach out to these people pre-purchase and say, this is what I'm needing. These are the questions that I have. What do you think? They're going to have way better insight than if you went and bought something goofy off eBay or from some massive company that's trying to, get a piece of the Subaru market. These people, they eat, sleep, and breathe Subaru stuff. And that's really important to me, is that they understand the platform and understand how it works. And that's a massive part of why these are some of the brands that I use. Let me know in the comments what you guys are running, what you want to run. Let me know any questions that you guys have. I don't usually ask for subscribers, but if you find anything helpful on this channel ever, definitely subscribe to the channel. If you've made it this far, you guys are an absolute freaking legend. And also make sure you're checking out the Dirt Subies podcast. trying to put that out every week. We'll see if that's sustainable. But right now, that's what we're doing every week. So until next time, I'll see you guys out on the trails.